The Raleigh Chopper sold 1.5 million units across Britain, while simultaneously racking up injury complaints that forced the company to redesign critical components multiple times. British parents in the early 1970s spent £32 on what cycling engineers would later call a design disaster. The bike featured a 16-inch front wheel paired with a fat 20-inch rear wheel, creating weight distribution so unbalanced that riders reported the front end lifting off the ground mid-ride. The gear lever sat directly in line with where a falling rider's groin would make contact. The handlebars extended so high that kids could tilt them backward until the steering geometry became nearly unmanageable. Raleigh marketed it as the hot one. The modifications tell a different story. Between 1969 and 1974, the company shortened the seat, moved rider positioning forward, welded handlebars to stems to prevent dangerous adjustment, added warning labels about carrying passengers, and completely redesigned the rear frame after reports of cracking under load. Each change addressed a specific failure mode. Alan Oakley, Raleigh's chief designer, claimed he sketched the original concept on an airmail envelope while returning from California in 1967 after studying American youth culture. Industrial designer Tom Caron later produced 1968 drawings from Ogle Design that look remarkably similar to the finished product. The Victoria and Albert Museum credits Caron as designer of the Mark II. Raleigh's corporate history honors Oakley as the in-house design lead. Even the origin story is disputed, which makes sense for a bike where everything became controversial. The American muscle bike craze, led by the Schwinn Stingray, copied the aesthetic of customized chopper motorcycles with banana seats and high handlebars. Raleigh's first attempt, the Rodeo, flopped completely. Oakley went to California specifically to understand why American designs worked. He came back with a sketch that evolved into something more extreme than its inspiration. The Chopper launched in the US and UK in 1969. Sales started modest in America, but exploded in Britain, where easy rider styling landed during peak youth culture obsession with rebellious American imagery. For kids in 1970s Britain, the Chopper became the single most coveted Christmas gift. Adults in their 50s and 60s still recall the specific Christmas morning when one appeared, or the kid on their street who had one while everyone else watched. Raleigh sold approximately 1.5 million Choppers before production ended in the 1980s. Multiple corporate histories credit the bike with saving the company from serious financial trouble. Before the Chopper, Raleigh made practical but uninspiring youth bikes. After the Chopper, they had a product that kids demanded regardless of price or functionality. The design created what cycling mechanics describe as built-in instability. The massive padded banana seat with its metal sissy bar backrest encouraged riders to lean far back, shifting even more weight over the already oversized rear wheel. The tiny front wheel became light, prone to sudden wobbles. Riders across the UK and beyond reported identical experiences. Hitting a modest speed on a small descent, feeling the handlebars start to shake, losing control as the oscillation increased. The geometry made speed wobbles a feature rather than a bug. The central T-bar gear lever, designed to make the bike feel like a sports car, sat positioned perfectly to cause injury during any forward slip from the saddle. British adults describe this gear lever impact as a defining, painful memory of childhood. The positioning wasn't accidental ignorance. It was the natural consequence of cramming automotive styling onto a bicycle frame. The weight became another problem. At roughly 18.5 kilograms, the Chopper used steel frames, chrome-plated steel rims, and chunky tires that made it far heavier than standard kids' bikes. Combined with relatively poor caliper brakes, descending hills on a Chopper meant wrestling a heavy front-light machine with inadequate stopping power. A Telegraph columnist who reviewed an early relaunch called it an absolute dog of a bike and a death trap on hills. Raleigh knew about the issues because they kept modifying the design. The Mark I allowed so much rearward weight distribution that the front wheel could lift completely off the ground. Kids carrying passengers on the long seat put enough stress on the rear stays that frames began cracking. The Mark II in 1972 shortened the seat, moved the rider forward, and strengthened the rear frame specifically to address these failures. Warning labels appeared. This bicycle is not constructed to carry passengers. Classic 1970s safety theater that everyone ignored. Kids used the long seat to give backies to friends constantly. Later Mark II models welded the handlebars to the stem so children couldn't adjust them into completely unsteerable positions. This modification happened because Raleigh had evidence that kids were riding the bikes far outside safe parameters. Modern claims mention lawsuits over the gear lever and suggest its positioning contributed to Raleigh dropping certain configurations. Hard numbers and official case records remain scarce. What's documented clearly is that cycling experts and parent groups criticized the handling, braking, weight, and overall toy motorbike approach while kids continued adoring it. The bike was never actually banned, despite widespread belief otherwise. Contemporary coverage discusses health and safety concerns and notes that it would probably be banned if it came out now, but that's commentary, not regulation. What happened instead? Problematic Mark I features got engineered out in the Mark II, warnings about passengers became explicit, and later toy safety and bicycle regulations tightened in ways that a 1970 spec chopper couldn't pass without modification. Modern rules on handlebar height relative to seat and seat height limits for one-piece saddles would require changes to the original design. The chopper's success spawned an entire Raleigh family of smaller models: Chipper, Tomahawk, Budgie, and Chippy, all echoing the same styling for younger children. Until BMX arrived in the mid-1980s, the chopper outsold rival youth bikes by 6-1. That level of market dominance for such an objectively flawed machine demonstrates something beyond rational purchasing decisions. For kids, the experience felt like owning a Harley in miniature. Sitting low with arms high created the sensation of riding something adult and dangerous, even while doing a paper round. The bike parked like a motorcycle thanks to its kickstands. It looks nothing like a normal child's bicycle, which was exactly the point. The flip side involved extensive injury folklore: smashed shins from pedals, scars from speed wobbles, and countless stories of boys sliding forward off the seat into the gear lever. One cycling article notes that an entire generation might have been discouraged from cycling by wrestling with these heavy, unstable machines during formative years. By the late 1970s, the chopper's weaknesses became obvious as BMX culture rose. BMX bikes were light, designed for jumping and tricks, and actually functional for the kind of riding kids wanted to do. The chopper suddenly looked old-fashioned and clumsy rather than rebellious and cool. Production of the original Mark II and variants ended in the early to mid-1980s. For a period, the chopper became deeply uncool, surviving mainly as hand-me-downs before ending up as scrap metal. Then, nostalgia kicked in hard. Raleigh brought back the chopper as the Mark III in 2004, roughly 25 years after stopping original production. This modernized reinterpretation changed geometry and parts, selling through to around 2012, mainly on retro appeal rather than recapturing mass-market dominance. Collectors and purists generally see the Mark III as less desirable than original 1970s bikes. The 2023 Mark IV launch proved that nostalgia had become a serious market. Raleigh spent 4 to 5 years developing what they officially called a near replica of the 1972 Mark II, including 3D scanning original frames and consulting hardcore enthusiasts. The limited edition bikes in classic infrared and ultraviolet carried a £950 price tag, available exclusively through Raleigh's website and Nottingham showroom. The initial 2023 run sold out within hours. Online stock disappeared in minutes. Queues formed overnight at the Nottingham store. Raleigh repeated the release in 2024 with new colors: Fizzy Lemon and Space Blue. The company emphasized that new bikes retain the one-piece saddle, mid-frame shifter, and sissy bar, but handlebars and saddle height have been subtly altered to comply with modern safety regulations on maximum seat height and bar position relative to the saddle. The pricing triggered immediate controversy. The original chopper cost roughly £32, equivalent to £400 to £450 in current money. The Mark IV costs £950 to £999. Cycling media accuse Raleigh of going hard on nostalgia with an eye-watering premium on what remains fundamentally a heavy toy. Fans defend the pricing by pointing to the collector's market, where original examples fetch thousands at auction. Safety concerns resurfaced immediately. Commentators and mechanics described the 1969 design as a dangerous piece of junk and expressed hope that new versions ride better than originals. originals. The Mark IV is explicitly aimed at nostalgic adults rather than children. Marketing talks about 70s kids of any age. Stricter regulations plus limited production mean the modern chopper functions more as a collectible or short-ride novelty than a practical daily bike. Forum discussions and social media posts from owners reveal that for tall adults, the riding experience is dreadful, focused on appearance rather than comfort. Every criticism from the 1970s applies to the modern version, while owners simultaneously admit they love how it looks. The paradox explains everything. All the things that made the chopper a terrible bicycle made it an incredible prop for childhood imagination. It looked like a motorbike, parked like a motorbike, and made riders feel older, cooler, and more independent than any normal bike could achieve. For many people now collecting them, the chopper represents a brief window when parents were more relaxed, streets were quieter, and kids were allowed to get hurt without lawyers waiting. Even fierce technical critics admit it's an unrivaled style icon. That's why remakes keep selling out despite universal acknowledgement that far better bikes exist for actually riding. The chopper saved Raleigh from financial trouble, defined a generation's childhood aspirations, and created a safety controversy that persists 5 decades later. It was never banned, but probably should have been modified far earlier than it was. The original design was fundamentally flawed. The modern reboot costs more than double what it should. People line up overnight to buy both versions anyway. In 2024, adults pay £950 for a bike they know rides poorly, breaks easily, and serves no practical purpose beyond triggering memories of feeling dangerous and free at age 10. The chopper's entire history demonstrates that nostalgia doesn't care about safety, functionality, or value. It cares about how something made people feel, even if that feeling included occasional terror and guaranteed pain.